Hi guys. So I'm going to continue with our read aloud. I actually looked up because do you guys remember that Mr. Brunner? It turns out his name is Sheeran, and I've been pronouncing it like Sheeran, and then I looked it up, and it turns out we pronounce it like Kyron. Okay, so Mr. Brunner is Kyron. So he is explaining to Percy how the gods move from one place to another depending on where the civilization is the most bright at that time. Um, and he's explaining that the gods never died, that they have always been there. They spent several centuries in England. All you need to do is look at the architecture. People do not forget the dog, not the dogs, the gods. Every place they've ruled for the last 3,000 years, you can see them in paintings, in statues, and the most important buildings. And yes, Percy, of course, they are now in your United States. Look at your symbol, the eagle of Zeus. Look at the statue of Prometheus in Rockefeller Center, the Greek facades of your government buildings in Washington. I defy, I defy you to find any American city where the Olympians are not prominently displayed in multiple places. Like it or not, and believe me, plenty of people weren't very fond of Rome either, America is now the heart of the flame. It is the great power of the West. And so Olympus is here. And we are here. It was all too much, especially the fact that I seemed to be included in Chiron's we, as if I were a part of some club. Who are you, Chiron? Who am I? Chiron smiled. He shifted his weight as if he were going to get up of his wheelchair, but I knew that was impossible. He was paralyzed from the waist down. Who are you? He mused. Well, that's the question we all want answered, isn't it? But for now, we should get you a bunk in cabin 11. There will be new friends to meet, and plenty of time for lessons tomorrow. Besides, there will be s'mores at the campfire tonight, and I simply adore chocolate. Who doesn't, right? And then he did rise from his wheelchair, but there was something odd about the way he did it. His blanket fell away from his legs, but his legs didn't move. His waist kept getting longer, rising above his belt. At first, I thought he was wearing very long white velvet underwear. But as he kept rising out of his chair, taller than any man, I realized that the velvet underwear wasn't underwear. It was the front of an animal. Muscle under coarse white fur. And the wheelchair wasn't a chair. It was some kind of container. An enormous box on wheels. And it must have been magic because there's no way it could have held all of him. A leg came out, long and knobbly kneed, with a huge polished hoof. Then another front leg, and then the hind quarters, so the back legs. And then the box was empty, nothing but a metal shell with a couple of fake human legs attached. I stared at the horse, who had just sprung from the wheelchair, a huge white stallion. But where its neck should be was the upper body of my Latin teacher, smoothly grafted to the horse's trunk. What a relief, the centaur said. I've been cooped up in there for so long. My fetlocks had fallen asleep. Now come, Percy Jackson, let's meet the other campers. So turns out Chiron is a centaur. Do you remember we also saw centaurs in Harry Potter? So there we go. We now know that Grover is a satyr and Chiron is a centaur. Okay, chapter 6. I become supreme lord of the bathroom. Once I got over the fact that my Latin teacher was a horse, we had a nice tour, though I was careful not to walk behind him. I'd done Pooper Scooper Patrol in the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade a few times, and I'm sorry, I did not trust Chiron's back end the way I trusted his front. Why do you think? What happens when you walk behind a horse? Two things can happen. Either they can kick you, or they can go to the bathroom. We passed the volleyball pit. Several of the campers nudged each other. One pointed to the minotaur horn I was carrying. Another one said, "That's him." Most of the campers were older than me. Their satire friends were bigger than Grover, all of them trotting around in orange Camp Half-Blood t-shirts, with nothing else to cover their bare, shaggy hindquarters. I wasn't normally shy, but the way they stared at me made me feel uncomfortable. I felt like they were expecting me to do a flip or something. I looked back at the farmhouse. It was a lot bigger than I realized. 4 stories tall, sky blue with white trim, like an upscale seaside resort. I was checking out the brass eagle weather vane on top when something caught my eye. A shadow in the uppermost window of the attic gable. Something had moved the curtain. Just for a second, and I got the distinct impression that I was being watched. "What's up there?" I asked Kyron. He looked where I was pointing and his smile faded. "Just the attic." "Somebody lives there?" "No," he said with finality. Not a single living thing." I got the feeling he was being truthful. But I was also sure something had moved the curtain. "Come along, Percy," Kyron said, his light-hearted tone now a little bit forced. "Lots to see." We walked through the strawberry fields where campers were picking bushels of berries while a satyr played a tune on a reed pipe. Kyron told me the camp grew a nice crop for export to New York restaurants in Mount Olympus. "It pays our expenses," he explained, "and the strawberries almost take no effort." He said Mr. D had this effect on fruit-bearing plants. They just went crazy when he was around. It worked best with wine grapes, but Mr. D was restricted from growing those, so they grew strawberries instead. I watched the satyr playing the pipe. His music was causing lines of bugs to leave the strawberry patch in every direction, like refugees fleeing a fire. I wonder if Grover could work that kind of magic with music. I wonder if he was still inside the farmhouse, getting chewed out by Mr. D. "Grover won't get in too much trouble, will he?" I asked Kyron. "I mean, he was a good protector, really." Kyron sighed. He shed his tweed jacket and draped it over his horse's back like a saddle. "Grover has big dreams, Percy. Perhaps bigger than are reasonable. To reach his goal, he must first demonstrate great courage by succeeding as a keeper, finding a new camper and bringing him safely to Half-Blood Hill. But he did that." "I might agree with you," Kyron said, "but it's not my place to judge. Dionysus and the Council of Cloven Elders must decide. I'm afraid they might not see this assignment as successful. After all, Grover lost you in New York, and then there's that unfortunate, the fate of your mother. And the fact that Grover was unconscious when you dragged him over the property line. The council might question whether this shows any courage on Grover's part." I wanted to protest. None of what had happened was Grover's fault. I also felt really, really guilty. I hadn't given Grover the slip at the bus station. No, if I hadn't given Grover the slip at the bus station, he might not have gotten in trouble. "But he'll get a second chance, won't he?" Kyron winced. "I'm afraid that was Grover's second chance, Percy. The council was not anxious to give him another one either. After what happened the first time 5 years ago. Olympus knows. I've advised him to wait longer before trying again. He's so small for his age." "How old is he?" "Oh, 28. "What? And he was in the 6th grade?" "Satyrs mature half as fast as humans, Percy. Grover has been the equivalent of a middle school student for the past 6 years. Except for the fact... Give me a second. That's horrible. Quite, Kyron agreed. At any rate, Grover is a late bloomer, even by a satyr standards, and not yet very accomplished at woodland magic. Alas, he was anxious to pursue his dream. Perhaps now he will find some other career. That's not fair, I said. What will happen What happened the first time? Was it really so bad? I will continue in the next video.